Before we begin our panel, I'd first like to introduce Jose Alfonso. Jose is the newly minted and formal and approved Director of Aeronautical Information Services for the Mission Support Directorate inside the Air Traffic Organization. For some brief context, Jose, over to you, sir. Please take us away.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, James and Heidi, for giving us this opportunity to share an important part of Nodem modernization. And before I begin, to say that Notems is a complex process, I think is an understatement. Notice is very complex and very important. So with that, I'd like to start by saying that Notems, we're shooting for an optimal Nodem. And what's an optimal Nodem? It's a Nodem that I like to relate to, like for the folks that watch TV. Remember Dragnet, Joe Friday? Just give me the facts and nothing but the facts. That's how I relate Notems. They're the supplemental oxygen that I think keep the NAS, the National Airspace System, going when there's an unforeseen event that impacts the chart, publication, or any kind of information that would jeopardize safety. And like I said, it boils down to a short-term fix, or as I say, a triage of that scenario. And again, going back to the optimal Nodem scenario, we look at it, with three pieces of the pie. And you've covered a lot of them. You've actually touched base on a lot of them. And the first one was, being relevant. And Michael from Delta Airlines and also Jim from AOPA touched base on that. They have to be relevant. What applies to the commercial aviation folks when it comes to Nodem information is not going to be the same as what applies or what's interested for the agriculture, low-level flyers or the helicopter stakeholders that are checking, a power line, or they're checking an oil pipeline and things like that. So we have to keep that in perspective. And with it being relevant, we talked about it earlier too, is having the Notems available that pertain to me. And trust me, we've heard our stakeholders loud and clear on that, and we are doing our best to come up with a way to keep that information that's relevant to the stakeholders up front. Timeliness is the other second part that I like to touch base on. And one of the things we need to consider too is it's hard for us to control the volume of Notems with respect to, we don't know what events are going to occur that are going to require a Nodem. But we do have control of the amount of time that a Nodem is on the wire. And I say that because one of the challenges that we've discovered, in particular for airport-related type Notems, permanent Notems, is that there's some that have been out there for years, and to be completely transparent. And the only thing that we've been able to come up with or think that some of the folks at the airport managers or at the GA type airports might have the idea that that Nodem is meant to be on the Nodem wire permanently. And what we need to do is educate them that the purpose of a Nodem being considered permanent is that the event that generated the Nodem is of a permanent nature, not that the Nodem is going to be kept on the wire for a permanent amount of time. So with that, what we need to do is focus too on educating the folks that when an event occurs that is of permanent nature, that they're required to submit that information through the appropriate channels to update the information that's changed, or the data that has changed at the appropriate chart, publication, or database. And we have an order, FAA order 7900.2, which gives clear steps on how to do that, submitting that information for updating of the chart, publication, or database to the appropriate Aeronautical Information Services Group, which is the legacy National Flight Data Center. That term, or that usage of that office has now become the Aeronautical Data Team. So that would be submitted through there. The other thing that and James, you touched on it earlier too, is we need to make sure that as an agency, and being what I call the megaphone of the FAA for data when it comes to NOTEMs or any kind of data. Aeronautical Information Services needs to ensure that the data it's got the right quality of data and it's available to the users in the format that is agreed upon, so they could ingest it and they don't have to do a lot of work on their end, and they could readily take that into account. The other thing that I want to touch base on with timeliness is updating Air Circular, as they mentioned earlier, the Notems and airport for airport operators. That's going to be updated here the end of the year, along with the new Notem order. So that they're going to be supportive of each other. So that's a good move in the future of Notems. And then accuracy. You know, the accuracy of the Notems is so critical. Like I said earlier, it should just be like the facts, to the point, clear, concise Notems. And we do spot checks on things like that. In fact, this morning we were discussing one that there was an accident over the weekend, and there was some Notems on the wire. And we're looking at those Notems, you know, and looking to see if there's anything that could be reviewed by our team to improve it, or just learn from that, see if there's any updates that we could do. We've also, for the accuracy and for the making sure that the Notems are safe, we started having conversations with NASA, or we're going to start to discuss a study that they've performed a couple of years back that looks at the accuracy of Notems and how different categories and different buckets that they put Notems in, and how that they were confusing or misleading and things like that. So that's some of the efforts that we're trying out first when it comes to the optimal Notem. But it's incumbent upon all of us to have this joint approach and conversations, so that we make sure that we're moving in the right direction. Next slide. The next points that I like to highlight are some of the initiatives that we've taken on since we started this coalition with the stakeholders. And we're working on 3 years now since we started this, and it's gone by really fast. And one of the things that we started focusing on was automation. How can we leverage automation to help us work smarter and have that information available to our users? And one of them was the construction notice that we talked about earlier, that is going to be available. I want to say it's at the end of this month sometime. The other thing that was talked about in construction notices is that the use of Nodem Manager. And I really want to take this opportunity to promote folks starting to use Nodem Manager more and rely on that, because that's really going to be a huge benefit to everybody when it comes to the accuracy and the digital availability of Notems. The Nodem construction Notems are going to be, they're going to be able to consolidate the construction information, and they're going to eliminate having to do it manually, because until this initiative is deployed, we were doing those manually. So that's a big initiative that we're going to deploy at the end of this month or in October. The next one you guys heard about is the update of the advisory circular 150-5228G Notems for airport operators. And that's going to have new disposition for permanent Notems. It's also going to give instructions for field condition Notems and wildlife Notems. And it's going to have an appendix on the permanent Notem process. With that, I'd like to skip over or move on to the field condition Notems. That's another one that's going to be, that we're working on, and should be out in the spring of 22 with that release. And what that's doing is it's basically going to reduce the field condition Notems that we generate now by 50%. And what I mean by that is that we're not going to have to issue a Notem for each end of the concrete. We're going to be able to issue one Notem that it's going to cover both ends when the condition is the same throughout the whole slab of concrete. The other thing that it's going to do is, if there's already a Notem on the wire that has that runway closed, it's not going to let us issue a Nodem, a field condition Nodem on that closed runway. And that's going to increase safety in the sense that it's going to eliminate confusion for the user when they say, or when they see a Nodem that's closed the runway, and then they see a Nodem that's reporting, snow on the runway. So that's a big plus that it's underway. Then we also talked about earlier updating the Nodem system to start being more familiar with the ICAO way of doing things, and that's basically starting to lay the foundation as to what to expect when we go full ICAO phase 2 in the winter of 24. And that's really going to be, I call it the ribbon cutting ceremony of this initiative that we started 3 years ago, and we still got another 3. So it's going to be about a 6-year process that's taken on a lot of hard work and thinking outside. And I'm going to say the polygon. I'm not using the thinking outside the box anymore, because we don't live in a world that it's a box anymore. It's a polygon, because all the challenges that we're seeing come in different shapes, sizes, and just ways of thinking. We definitely got to think different, and definitely got to think of working together. So with that, that concludes my briefing. And James and Heidi, back to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, sir. Well done. Great intro. Lots of information. I do like how these visualizations are coming together. Accurate, timely, available, relevant. All the things of our infinite, endless goal of getting to the perfect Nodem distribution and use system. So degrees of success we can achieve, and realizing we'll never get all the way there, but progress every day. Thank you very much, Jose. With that, in the interest of time, let's jump right into bringing up the next panel members. Phil Davenport, Greg Uhas, Chris Oswald, and Des Salagi. Can you come off camera on and mics on mute until you're ready? Introduce you one at a time. Let's start with Phil. One of the reasons your hope for today, your goal for being on this panel today for us, Phil.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Jim. I'm glad to participate in the summit today because I, as well as the Office of Airports, have a vested interest to assist in making improvements of airport-related Notems whenever possible to ensure airport operators can continue to effectively issue as well as manage their Notems, and just like Jose said, to ensure safety throughout the NAS.
Thank you, Greg. Jose, we've already introduced you, and it's pretty clear to us why you were happy to be here today. Anything else to add? If not, we can keep going. Greg, tell us a little bit about what your hopes for being involved today. We get to talk to you about 6 times a week in our internal meetings, you and Des and Jose and others. So share a little bit about why you're happy to be involved in this today.
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. Flight service has kind of a unique perspective, and that we're both originators and consumers of Notems. So we're intimately familiar with the entire Nodem process from the moment of change and the NAS is identified and reported, to taking that abnormality, formatting in accordance with the Nodem order, and then analyzing, disseminating that information to pilots. And in the 13 years that I've been involved with flight service, I could tell you probably the most challenging part of delivering a pilot weather briefing is sifting through pages upon pages of Notems and providing only those that are pertinent to a particular flight based on date, time, flight type, altitude, so on and so forth. So most of that prioritization and sorting of Notems is going to be addressed by the upcoming ICAO transition. But in the meantime, our team's working on some short-term improvements for airport-related Notems that'll help alleviate the overall number of Notems in the system. And Jose pointed out a lot of those projects that we're working on. So this is going to make it easier for all users to get the right Notems that they need. And I'm excited to be here today because I've got a very mechanical mind and have a recurring theme in my life with most things, which is research them ad nauseum, modifying, streamline, or fixing those things for better functionality, and then maintaining those things for years to come. And I'd like to help in any way I can to apply this experience in the same manner for the Nodem system.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Greg. We're very lucky also to have Chris Oswald with us here today. Chris is Senior Vice President of Safety and Regulatory Affairs at ACI. Thank you very much, Chris, and also appreciate you being part of our airport spinoff coalitions to address some of these issues with airports. So interested to hear your perspective on what you're hoping from this session today.
Sure, and thanks, Jim. Well, I'll just say that I don't know if I'm certainly hoping for a great discussion during the session, but benefiting from the prior session as well. I think we're really looking for on the airport community side is how we can be effective partners with FAA as you move forward through changes in the system. And just knowing, I know Phil's going to talk in just a few seconds here, but that's been a really effective partnership. We've seen that as we move forward with TALPA, which I know was nothing easy, Phil, and on your part with those folks from Office of Airports, the outreach that was required. It was a huge effort and one that I think has paid off with pretty effective uptake. And as we look towards conversions in format, conversions in the way that Notems might be submitted, we've got a huge community. Only some of which my association represents, and reaching out to them is it's a real challenge, and hopefully we can discuss some of the ways that we can address that challenge going forward. So, thanks.
Oh, wonderful and great point, and to your point as well, we do have other airport representatives as well on the coalition. So Heidi and team have done an amazing job of pulling a very diverse and inclusive set of people, including your peers in NSAO and AAAE and others. So thank you very much for being a part of our ongoing discussions in today's panel. Des Salagi, a lot of passion around this topic as well, never short of words. What are your hopes for today in today's discussion?
Thank you, James. So I'm excited to be part of the Nodem modernization whole, but especially with airport Notems. Being a pilot, it's very important. We've heard industry say today how important it is. And so I'm excited that we'll get to talk about that right now. And I get to talk about it with Greg and Phil, who I work with a lot, and I'm glad I get to work with them a lot. So I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Okay, let's jump in. I've not just starting to catch up with the chat and other things. So thank you again, panelist members. And again, a reminder to the audience, if you want to be part of the conversation, raise your hand, submit it in chat. We don't have a lot of questions thus far, but we want to make sure that we have an interactive dialogue here. So let's see what we've got in the chat.
Yeah, so James, I think maybe we'll kick off with one that is a carryover from our last discussion, last panel, right? It was really appropriate for this panel. And Chris, I would love to throw this one out at you as our industry participant first, if you will allow me. So I think the question revolved around, will any of the improvements that are made in the Nodem and standardization of the Nodem system and the transition to ICAO, will they have an impact or change for those who issue Notems? And I think that at the heart of this is those who are issuing Notems are the airport operator or sponsor, correct? So thoughts around that discussion. What do we need to ensure that they're ready for this transition?
Sure. So I think I get to provide the initial politically correct answer of it depends. I think it depends a lot on what we're going to see in terms of submittal process. So what are the expectations and the changes that'll take place in the automation systems for most airports? I think certainly the airports that our organization represents are submitting in that manner. And if that's generally not not requiring huge reinterpretations of terminology, it's probably not a huge change. I think it's going to be more than that. I think certainly as you look to kind of reviewing what you're submitting, there's a need to get folks educated on how that terminology had changed. I was interested in certainly the discussion of the Q codes and kind of introducing a brand new system, managing that change for airports. So depending on the significance of the change, and that's something I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about as we go into the next year here. I think there's a lot of outreach that's going to be needed. So the TALPA process, I mentioned that in the opening remarks. with purpose. That's really kind of instructive of the type of outreach and the level of outreach that really can be effective. And that was a multi-year process, involved multiple meetings, both at regional levels, kind of the direct contacts between certification folks and the airport operators themselves, as well as in more national forums. So I'd love to get into some discussions of exactly how we organize that, but a lot of it is going to need to be handled through outreach on that front, depending on how much change there actually is in civilian.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Others on the panel, I'd like to open it to the full panel with regard to this notion of, the impacts on the originator. Others have inputs or thoughts. Greg, I don't know if you do or not from a training perspective.
So as far as the ICAO transition goes, there will be extensive training for airport operators, flight service specialists, air traffic controllers, all the folks that are involved with using that new format. And so I believe Jennifer's leading most of those initiatives, but yeah, there are quite a few on the horizon. From what I've heard, the systems will probably be more of a seamless transition as far as entering the Nodem information. The Nodem that comes out on the other end will look different, but to the user, there may be a few changes, but it might look very similar. So, but anyone else is welcome to chime in.
Hi, this is Phil from Office of Airports. I just want to chime in and say, just like Christopher said, we rolled out TAPA back in 2016. What we found was pretty effective was some type of demo site to kind of give the airport operator capability to kind of play around with what's going to be changing system-wise, specifically if it's going to be a real big change that's going to really shake things up where they're not accustomed to doing things in the same way that they had been doing for years. So when we roll out TAPA, that demo system we set up for the airport operator to determine how to do runway condition assessment, and using the runway condition assessment matrix paid dividends for us.
I knew what happened sooner or later. I'd be talking with the mute button, and I finally got there, right? Thank you guys. It's really helpful chiming in. I appreciate it. So maybe another audience question from Jeff. Will Nodem Manager generate my Q codes for me as I develop a Nodem? I really don't want to have to wade through that list to find the correct correlating code. And so Des or others, I mean, this keeps popping into my head, right? As much as we can do from an automation standpoint to make the job easier seems like the best course of action, but I don't know how difficult that is. So what are you thinking around automation there?
So Heidi, thank you. And you're correct. Our goal is when we go to full ICAO is to try to levy automation as much as possible. If we can ask some questions or gather some information from the person originating the Nodem, that we could develop a Q code. Because as you heard Caroline last session, one of her lessons learned was you don't want to have the same Nodem issued in two different places with multiple Q codes. So if we can, our aim is to try to use that automation to determine that Q code and then maybe quality check it down the line. But we don't really want to just give everybody a blank screen and say, hopefully you know ICAO document 8126 and go forth. So yes, we do want to try to levy automation for that.
I suspected that could be your answer, but I'm really glad to hear it reiterated. And I suspect Chris is as well, right, Chris? I mean,
yeah, no, it's, I was about to raise my hand and just comment. I think a piece of that is really knowing, as look at the timelines for implementation and transition. If that's an achievable goal, and there's an idea that that's substantially achievable, knowing that upfront would be great, but it's probably even more important to know if that might be only partially achievable, because again, setting up the training, the communication, the coordination with folks who some of our airports have been doing this for decades plus, is pretty important to get out in front of them. Again, change management is kind of core in what I'm hearing here, and having that process get out to the airport is pretty key.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So I do think we have Jim Mills with DoD. Glad you're with us today, sir. It looks like you have a hand up.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I think I know most of you know me. Good to be here. I put a suggestion out there, and I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but you probably do. So DoD is using the FAA Nodem Manager system. FAA built it for us. They designed it for us based on our requirements. We mainly do airport Notems. Not all, but 80% of our Notems are airport Notems. We have a handful of TERPS Notems, a small amount of airspace, small amount of chart Notems. And the ICO version they built for us kind of touches on all these conversations. I've been looking at all these little lovely chats going on here. And it touches a lot of the concerns people have. So suggestion might be not today, but somewhere down the road, give everybody a peek under the tent. This is an FAA product that they built, ICO product, Q codes, drop downs, scenarios, everything we're talking about. So we already have a tool. And then use that for feedback. Just an idea. Just want to throw it out there.
Thanks, Jim. Really helpful. I'm glad you piped in. And I know Jen responded via chat, but just to reiterate, I know she was going to get in touch with you, and we'll connect in reference to a future ICO meeting and how we make that happen. So thank you. Let me encourage others while I have the mic for a sec to jump in. I know we've had a number of discussions around how we engage airport operators and airport related Notems as part of our coalition discussions. But if folks have thoughts or inputs, we would love to have you engage. So get your hands up. Looks like Mike Carrolls, you were on our previous panel. Love to have you jump in here, sir. Go ahead. I think you're still on mute, Mike.
I did what I do. How do you just did that? Now, now I just did it as well.
Right.
How do we get around airport authorities feeling that they have to issue a NOTAM mainly to protect themselves from liability? We see it a lot during our NOTAMs. I mean, there are certain airports in the Northeast that I feel that they never can get a taxiway sign because they'll issue the NOTAM in March, but it's valid through the end of the year. And they'll have 9 or 10 taxiway signs that are NOTAMed out. How do we get airport operators to be more comfortable not issuing NOTAMs to, shield themselves from liability?
Hey, Michael, this is Jose. I don't have the answer to your question, but I will expand on it in that we've seen a lot of Notems in non-movement areas. And that's a similar challenge that we're asking, why are we seeing Notems on non-movement areas? And we're trying to wrap our arms around that, which, if I understood your question correctly or your comment correctly, goes hand in hand with that, or pretty close to it.
Yeah, I mean, my flippant answer on the airport side is indemnification or liability reform on that front, but none of those are very appealing for anyone to take up on the regulatory side. So I think it's education and coordination on that front, and I think in that education process, conveying the actual increases in risk that go along with providing NOTAMs that are, I mean, we've already addressed perms, so I won't say necessarily irrelevant, but NOTAMs that are not at a volume that you lose the critical safety information in the chaff. So there's not I don't think there's an easy solution other than that hard-earned education. I was going to pick up on the perm side because I think that's very related, in the discussions that have gone on, that perm NOTAM issue that FAA has been working and trying to address it to a certain extent through various airport associations, really stems from that area. And I look at the wildlife NOTAMs in particular. I think those are ones that are probably the most egregious when we look at perm notems and use to define relatively broad areas where there's wildlife that's been cited. Wildlife biologists don't like it. I was just talking to a wildlife biologist today, works with airports, not particularly informative. I don't think pilots find them particularly informative, but done in part for, call it due diligence or liability protection, really, abundance of caution. The information that was provided in the revised, it's the draft version of the NOTAM AC advisory circular that's out there for airports, does provide pretty great information on what you should use NOTAMs for and what you shouldn't. There's more detail on the wildlife side. It begins that communication and that dialogue. I think also looking to the firm side and under what conditions you need to move that firm information, again, the 90 days into formal charting, getting that information out there and getting it out in a, I don't know if Bill will agree with me on this front, but we usually view those ACs as pseudo-regulatory documents. They're required for compliance. So that is a little bit more definitive and formal way to get folks out of the mode of just let's put everything in just in case.
Yeah, great inputs, Chris. So I know Jim McClay has his hand up. Jim, let's go to you. And then I want to capture the question from Fergus. It's in the chat. So Fergus, if you want to join online and via video after Jim goes, we would welcome it. Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. So I just wanted to follow on something here from, this was something we brought up in the discussion that you and James and I participated in a few months ago on the topic of Notems. And we talked about it in the perspective of airport operators. And that is just, I think, and again, I touched on this earlier, I believe as well, but trying to find a way, and I don't think I know what the answer is either as to how to make this happen, but try to find a way to encourage airport operators to, when they're putting Notems out, always have the question in their minds, how is the average pilot going to understand, or is the average pilot going to understand what it is that I'm trying to convey? And because I think it is potentially really an easy thing for Notems to become a matter of procedure. Hey, something happens at the airport, I got to put a Notem out, and you check the box and the Notem's out there. And maybe there's not necessarily a lot of thought that goes into, okay, is this information actually helping the pilots? Is this actually conveying something understandable to the pilot? And so I'm not really sure what the answer is to that. I'll kind of throw that out there as an open question. I don't know if that's a training thing or what. But I used an example before of, a few months ago, we were talking about Notems in terms of contingency operations, and a Notem that was put out there was instructing pilots in the event of a contingency. There were actually two different radio frequencies presented in the Notem, that it was completely confusing. It was not clear at all who the pilot was actually supposed to be talking to. So I think the Notem contained the information perhaps that it needed to, but in terms of how the pilots would understand what to do, it was very, very murky. So anyway, I just think that's something that's important that we add to the conversation. Again, I don't know what the answer is to how we fix that, but that's something we're paying a lot of attention to.
Yeah, I think it's good feedback, Jim. I mean, it's know your audience, right? Jose, any thoughts around this? Reminders, Chris, same from you.
Hey, if I may, this is George with Airfield Ops at MCO. I think the point that's being lost, perhaps, is every year we're inspected by FAA airport certification safety inspectors. And every 3 years they rotate out, and every 3 years we have a different set of expectations. So when I, as an ops guy, go out there and we find a condition, let's say an unlighted sign like you're talking about, maybe a string of edge lights that are out, there's an expectation, especially if a work order has been issued, that the FAA can expect that a Notem will be issued. So while the pilot may find that information not necessarily of value for his operation, probably because this pilot is flying multiple times a day, he really doesn't need to see anything beyond closures. From an FAR 139 compliance perspective, airport operators are put in a situation where if we do not issue NOTAMs, I've had inspectors literally tell me, you will be in court if there's an accident. And every single NOTAM, every single work order you issue matters to that lawyer. And that's the way we're trained, and that's the way we're spoken to by the regional inspectors. And it's just, I think we're talking about different silos here. So we have air traffic organization here, we have more FAA administration here, but I'm looking strictly from the viewpoint of an airport operator. If I do not issue that NOTAM and there is an incident, I do not want to be subpoenaed for the next 5 to 10 years because I did not issue the appropriate NOTAM, for an emergency circumstance. So I think that's where a lot of people are coming from as an airport operator, but I don't think pilots fully understand that compliance portion of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic feedback, George. I'm glad you jumped in, because I think that's something, again, from an operator perspective, we don't always understand the relevancy, right? Just from maybe our perspective and our operation, but there's likely a rationale and a need for some of what we don't understand, right? Whether that be from a legality standpoint or prior issues that have occurred that we weren't privy to. So Phil,
That's absolutely correct. I mean, so it's not, no one enjoys sitting here issuing NOTAMs because there's something wrong on your airfield, but it's really the way the process, the FAR 139 process goes. So from an airport operator's perspective, I would rather have more NOTAMs out for things that are outside of FAR 139 tolerance to cover my airfield. Although I do know that, I'm a pilot myself, and I've gotten flight service briefings where it's like, you can't muddle through it. I mean, perhaps if things were sectioned off in terms of criticality, like let's say runway closures are presented first and taxiway closures, then some of the more non-relevant compliance issues that pilots possibly don't care about or may not be too concerned about are prioritized or categorized that way when a briefing is put out. So, maybe it can be using these codes, perhaps you can section off the most critical ones, and the pilot can pay attention to, he can focus on maybe the runway closures or a construction closure or something of that nature, as opposed to a sign, one sign. I mean, my airfield has 700 lighted signs, okay? Does the pilot really care about that one sign? Probably not. But from my perspective, I need to issue that NOTAM until the parts are ordered or until it's repaired. That's part of our process. So
yeah, and I think there's a lot more dialogue around what is pertinent from a safety perspective. Good to know. Going to end up taking my ticket if I don't comply. Right there's some different categories there. Phil, I'd love to have you jump in here.
Hey Heidi, I'm going to invite my colleague Alberto Rodriguez. He's the staff senior airport certification safety inspector to kind of chime in on this question.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Those are great points, I think, that were cited, and I'm hoping that we could add some clarity here because, obviously our audience is very diverse. But from a NOTAM standpoint, when we talk about that sign example, some of those signs are kind of related to safety items, right? That's the underlying theme here, and the reason why you want to issue a NOTAM is because ultimately there's going to be some impact to safety. And so, in certain scenarios, even taxiway signs can have an impact on runway incursion prevention. So that's one of the gauges that an airport should be using as to what needs to be NOTAM. And then on top of that, or the other side of that is that there are FAA standards which very clearly outline certain thresholds of when you need to NOTAM something. So for example, when we talk about the runway lighting outage example that was brought up earlier, there is a percentage threshold of runway lights that are allowed to be out of service before you have to take action, right? And once you meet that certain threshold, now that runway either becomes closed or you need to NOTAM that lighting system out of service because there's a hazardous condition now. And then going to the other complexity that we talked about earlier with the different pilot audiences, certain operators, 121 operators have different operating requirements than do, let's say, a general aviation pilot in a Cessna. So some of those lighting outages impact their operation. Like, for example, if you lose 85% of your runway lights, now that approach procedure is no longer valid in certain circumstances. And so it's a very complex and multiple layers type of a problem. But, I think that kind of what Jose was alluding to earlier, one of the fixes is going to be having a training component that we kind of go back to the basics, right? What is the intent of the NOTAM? There are a host of requirements, both regulatory and from an FAA standards perspective, that do prompt an airport operator as to when they should be issuing a NOTAM. It's not work order related. It's pre-established standards. And depending on those circumstances, again, when you reach that threshold, you need to issue a NOTAM because there's a potential safety issue here. But again, the idea should not be I need to cover my bases in case I get a lawsuit. That's not the motivation. There's a safety piece here and some thresholds that need to be issued. Of course, in the lawsuits, we've heard, pilots and operators bring up the fact that the airport didn't do A or the airport didn't do B related to FAA standards and things of that nature. So I know that's a concern for airport operators, and it's not. I just want to validate that concern. It is a concern because it's there's historical data there. But again, getting back to the basics on what we need to do for the issuance of NOTAMs, that's something that is very effective. And we look forward to having more discussions on can we limit those items that are not necessarily needing to be NOTAMed, and those are the discussions for the training piece that I think. And I also want to give a huge shout out, if you will, to the NOTAM system management, because through NOTAM Manager, I don't know if a lot of operators are familiar with this, but probably 90% of the NOTAMs that you see out there are not free-form NOTAMs. They're very rigidly constructed through drop-down window type of NOTAM issuance. And so we do a lot of mitigation of human factor components there. So there's an immense level of standardization that has been gained through the process of automation. And so I think we'll be able to kind of continue to leverage that going forward. But hopefully I answered some of the several questions that were floating out there. And if not, please chime in.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for chiming in, Alberto. I'm learning a ton, I'll say that. Chris, I know you had your hand up, so want to chime in here.
Yeah, and I'll pick up on maybe a little bit of where Alberto left off with his comments. There's we use a lot of processes. I think of an airport planner in my background, so I think of airport layout plans as a document which started off with one purpose and then has morphed into a much broader set of purposes. I think we see that with NOTAMs as well, and that's what comes into play here. The question of whether or not that NOTAM's needed from a compliance perspective might be tied, tangentially back to a potential compliance issue, or is really essential for operations, or something that pilots are really paying attention to and utilizing in the way that they're utilizing the airport. Coming back around through that, and maybe it's a broader application of the term education, I think there is a need, as we look at kind of modernization, and recognizing that there's an issue as raised in the initial question here. There are too many NOTAMs. I'm not getting the information I need, and that's been an issue for a long time. Prioritization does get us there. The ability to filter and sort, which has been promised for a number of years here, gets us there to a certain extent as well. That the consumers are better able to get the information they need. But I think providing clearer, and I threw this in the chat in response to one of the comments that had come through from airport operator side, Michael, that having that clear indication on the cert side or from Office of Airports on what's not needed, what isn't desired in the NOTAM, in NOTAMs is going to be very useful. And I do think that the draft AC bill that you guys have out does put us on that path. There are areas where there's more clarity in what you should be publishing and what you shouldn't, especially non-digital.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks for chiming in. And I think a point that Carolyn made in the chat feature, and Carolyn, you're welcome to expand, but I just wanted to note it that there is some subjectivity within the ICAO guidance on some of what's been shared. So a really good comment if she wants to jump in here.
Yes, absolutely. Reopening the camera. All right. So yeah, when you look at the Annex 15 or maybe Panzame now, there's a big list of thou shall issue Notems for, and then a list of don't issue Notems for. And when you look at this big list, you know, you see like light outages and frequency outages and everything is listed. Some states interpret this as, well, whenever these things happen, I must issue a NOTAM. But sometimes they're all linked to the same cause. And it's not super clear whether you need to issue all of these 10, 12 NOTAMs or just the one NOTAM and indicate, well, you know, as a result, this happened. So, you know, most states, I believe, interpret this as I should issue a NOTAM on everything. And that's certainly what we've done in Canada for the past few decades.
Thank you. Really appreciate that insight. It's helpful to hear what other NSPs are doing. So I do want to circle back. Fergus, I don't know if you want to pop on screen, but I'm going to kind of go through your question here. I think it's worthwhile to make sure it gets noted. Can anyone address how the Nodem system will interact with the AIP, ASC, AIS supplements? And do you know specifically if the AIP will be ICAO EAIP compliant? This is in respect to Notems that are permanent and need to be removed from the Nodem system after several months of being issued. Anybody? Jose, I don't know if you guys want to tackle that one, or Des, who might speak to it.
For us, the current policy, and Jerry Torres could chime in, or Des, we're going to keep that permanent Nodem on the wire until the appropriate chart publication or database is updated. That's one of our pushes to make sure the folks know when it's a permanent nature, that there's another step that they're not off the hook. And it's understood that if it's issued as a permanent Nodem, that somebody else will take it over. That's not how it's always been done. And I think that's the gap in how we process permanent Notems. As far as AICs, I'm not sure we even have an AIC as a state. I could be wrong, but I'm going to let Des or Jerry talk to that, or Philip.
Yeah, Jose, the AIP right now, the United States does not have an AIP supplement. We have that exception to ICAO. And I think part of the question is, will we have it by the time we go to ICAO? And that's unknown. That's a large change. And so I know it's being discussed, I think, with the Nodem modernization. So at this point, we don't know if we'll have an AIP sub by then, or if we'll still have an exemption to that ICAO policy.
I'll just comment in on that. You know, with that kind of change, that's a huge impact on the airport operators in the U.S., as you guys know. So it is something where we are, you know, pretty different than most of the other countries in the world as we look at the you know, aeronautical information publications, and that's again kind of big lift. A lot of that information certainly generated but not formatted in AIP, kind of that AIP style. And I think that would be a much broader discussion for who would be responsible for what if we were needing to go that route. So I don't know if that's a caution. I think it would be, you know, something we really need to work on as a community, you know, kind of cross agency to industry.
Yeah.
For the panel, is there a better objective to getting to the ask? I mean, the ask is things that are in there longer than they should. Is there, if not that solution, is there a better solution within our grasp?
Right, and I think that's a narrower focus area for maybe Fergus's question on that front. I don't know if you'd want to interpret it more, but I think the idea of you're really moving to a charted publication as opposed to NOTAM. So and whether we call that an AIP or we call that you know, facility directory, or you know, however else you might be portraying it, we could leave that terminology on the side.
Greetings, it's Fergus. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
So the reason why we are asking about the AIP is because it has a very defined cycle for revision and update. The Notems will leave the system after 90 days usually, and then go into a supplement, which then we get notification that that information has moved. You know, a lot of the international operators, including ourselves, use Jeppesen approach charts and EFD systems, or electronic flight bag systems. So part of the problem for us is knowing when that information has actually left the system and gone to publication. The reverse is also true, that we're carrying a lot of Notems that have been revised and updated on the Jeppesen charting system. So the users and international carriers, just like ourselves, are seeing a lot more Notems out there than we actually should for individual airports, because we're using an industry third-party vendor to display those charts. In most cases, internationally, the information has been picked up by Jeppesen from the AIC, the AIP, and so forth. And so there's a known revision cycle chart that usually coincides with the AIRAC publication dates. So we pretty much know when those Notems are going to disappear or should have disappeared. Or in our case, sometimes we'll actually have to go back in and suppress those Notems because the item has been corrected. So what we're looking for industry-wide would be some sort of uniformity in how the data is published and taken out of the Nodem system, so that we have notification, we have an understanding that it's being moved and migrated. There are times where, in fact, Notems go into the AIC and the supplements, but because there is such importance to captains, crews, and dispatchers, for instance, like curfew times, so forth, we actually have to take that information back out of the hard-coded publication and put it back into our company Notem systems in order for our flight planners to understand when the airport is open and closed. So we're looking for a much tighter link to the AIP. And the electronic AIP, which Eurocontrol actually has over 50 different AIPs on their website for various countries around the world, including Russia, Cuba, China, you name it. We're looking for some migration, or at least some understanding and a defined timeline from the FAA as to when they will develop such a product for us, because it's critical that we are all using the same type of systems, the same methodology, and the same AIRAC methodology to update our systems. Otherwise, we're always using something different, and differences in aviation always have bad results. If we're using standardized procedures, standardized methodology, we will always ensure success. But we can't do that in this particular area because there is no electronic EAP produced by the US. And so we need to address this. And the question is it on the radar, and is it being addressed currently? Thank you.
Thanks, Fergus. Appreciate you chiming in. Carolyn, I'm going to ask you to pop in. I know I've seen your hand for a little bit here.
I just wanted to, I put the comment in the chat, but I think it's still pretty pertinent to the conversation we're having. This idea of putting information out of NOTAM into supplements, AIP amendments, or AIC, that works only if you can be fast at reacting and producing these products. What we're finding out is it takes us a little bit longer than it should, and then people choose to do NOTAM because with NOTAM, they know they can make a call and within minutes it's out there, which is not the same with a supplement or an AIC, because they are documents that are formatted, in our case, translated in both official language and so on. So if that flexibility is not there, I think you'll find that there will be little appetite to use these products. And a consequence of us not having this great flexibility, and we are working on it, is that people are not consulting them as much as they should, because they don't realize because we end up using them for cranes and things like that they may not believe is that important. I mean, it's all important, but I think they're not as consulted as they should. So the lesson learned is to use those, you should be able to churn them out within a matter of days, 2 days. And maybe you need to start with issuing a NOTAM. And as soon as that supplement or AIC is produced, get rid of the NOTAM. Over.
Thank you. A really helpful perspective and appreciate that, especially following some really good insight from Fergus. Jose, I think you're unmuted, sir. So I want to make sure you have an opportunity to respond here if you'd like.
Yeah, no, in fact, I want to say that I thought we had done away with the AIP not too long ago, or significantly reduced it to an online only publication. And I have to go back and make sure that I'm not misquoting something there. And for some reason, the name Rune Duke comes to mind, in that he was a proponent of the action we took. But again, I could be wrong.
And yeah, I think, are we referencing the NTAP? The Notems publication?
And I could be confusing the AIP with that.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Well, all I can say is this has been a fantastic discussion. I've learned a lot, but it's been a really quick hour. James, I don't know about you. I think we have more things that maybe we're not all in consensus on than we do consensus at this point, but it's been a great discussion. I love the airport operator input that we've had to this one.
I do too. I mean, this has been long overdue. And, you know, I do appreciate that our airport sponsorship and the association representation has really ticked up in this last year and a half on our coalition meetings. And I think it's been to our great benefit for everybody. So thank you, Chris, and your peers who stay engaged there. I heard a number of themes. Of course, the consistent theme in all things Notems has been partnership. There's no way to move one thing without affecting another. There is no changing one thing in a vacuum that nobody else will be affected by. Consistency and agreement and consensus in Notems is a very elusive topic, because everybody has such a unique perspective of their unique operational need. However, I tend to believe, as a systems thinker by nature, in data and in analysis and discussion, I think we may discover some more common ground that we can endeavor to close together. Certainly in the AIS coalition, but also, you know, things such as looking at, if we could look at the volume of things that are created that maybe weren't required or people believe aren't required, could we find some themes in there? Could we find the integration between the airport certification requirements versus the ATO requirements versus the pilot versus the various entities? I think I'm imagining listening sessions. I'm imagining going through a set of example cases with all the constituents here represented to say, is this the right affectation of our policy? Is this the right way to go about this? Could we find a better way to, again, remove the noise without getting rid of the relevant, which is that two sides of that scale, you know, quality versus quantity. And I think great discussions here. I'm thinking airport regional inspectors, you know, Phil and your team from the airports, you know, getting our folks from the policy team, getting the coalition members for airports in the same room, and looking at some of our data and what would pilots say, and are we delivering and providing a notice that we think is useful, that isn't operationally useful, or only operationally useful to some people. And I'll loop this back to the ICAO panel. Now, how do you Q code those so that only the right pilot flying the right procedure with the right aircraft and the right airspace gets the notice and nobody else? It seems unachievable, but I really believe that in the data analysis and the discussion, we can find some more common ground on these things and move the needle. So I was, like you, Heidi, I was swimming with new information in this discussion, and I do not know what I do not know about airport Notems. I'm happy to admit to all of you, but I think we can get we can create some more forums where we can talk about what's the utility and necessity of these things and make sure that we work as an FAA team with industry to improve them.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a few more folks that could be part of that team, right? I heard a few new voices today, especially on the operator side, that gave some excellent examples of what's going on. So we'll work with Chris and wrangle a few of those into some future discussions. I was really energized by this discussion.
Yeah, grassroots stuff. You get intel right from the field and right from the operations. You get to see how people are interpreting the policy that we write at 60,000 feet. Right. Yeah, great discussion.
That's right. Yeah, so thank you again to the panel. I'm just going to say it's been a full day. It's been a great day. Some robust discussion, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't just say a huge thank you to the FAA team. One of the things that industry asked for was a way to engage directly on screen, face to face in a virtual environment, right? If that's even possible. We've been a little bit used to some YouTube type of seminars. Didn't feel like maybe that was the best use of our engagement. We set the bar high, you guys met it. So thank you to the entire team. We really appreciate it. I appreciate all of our industry participants and those who stepped up to be on panels today. Very much appreciated. This isn't the end of the discussion, folks. There's a whole lot I think we raised here today that just means there's going to be some great ongoing dialogue, some robust dialogue. So be prepared for that following today's discussion. So Jim, thanks for letting me be a part of this. I'm going to leave it to you for final words, sir.
This has been a heck of a day. So thank you to my FAA colleagues for your engagement and in participation. There is a lot that went into this today. So thank you for all the last minute conversations and prep and dialogue. It would take another 2 hours for me to list everybody's names that did a lot of work here. So thank you, everybody. We have a lot to do after today. We've got chat questions to capture and send out. We've got some closed captioning to edit to these videos and get those out. We've got a number of IOUs in terms of websites and reference material that we want to get out. So again, the conversation doesn't end here. Heidi said it best. It'll continue. I think we can switch to close out and thank yous. I'm going to mess up with my thank you, so I'm just going to say to my closest colleagues in this coalition executive champion role, my job here has really been to kind of pull the FAA people together and represent to industry a consistent attention to it. But I have to tell you, there is no shortage of internal motivation to make progress on this issue.